and darkness tries to hide and trembles at his voice, trembles at his voice. How great is our God? Sing with me, how great is our God? And all will see how great is our God. Age to age, he stands, and time is in his hands, beginning and the end, beginning and the end. The Godhead three in one, Father, Spirit, and Son, the Lion and the Lamb, the Lion and the Lamb. How great is our God? Sing with me, how great is our God? And all will see how great is our God. Name above all names, worthy of all praise. My heart will sing how great is our God. Your name above all names. You are worthy of all praise. And my heart will say how great is our God. All right, we are ready to get started. So I will turn it over to Miss Barbara Simpson.
Good evening. It is my pleasure to welcome you to our second Legislative Advocacy Day workshop. Our theme is Jesus, Justice in Action. Before I begin, I would like to acknowledge our Bishop, Reverend Jonathan Hostin, the Bishop of our South Carolina United Methodist Conference, our President, Miss Kathy Ford. She is the president of the South Carolina Conference for the United Methodist Women. Miss Linda Eichenberger. She's our chairperson for the Social Action Mission Coordinator for the South Carolina Conference United Methodist Women and the District Action Coordinators. And tonight, we want to open you up with a small prayer. Lord, we thank you for those that are among us this evening. Unless your spirit is with us and our gathering is in vain. Please lead and guide us as we gather virtually Zoom with our legislative workshop this evening. We thank you for your goodness and your graciousness. Amen. We have a dynamic speaker tonight. Our area of focus is on elderly abuse, presented by Mr. Russell Rich. Mr. Russell Rich is the director of the County of Operation and Communication Relationships for Adult Advocacy at the South Carolina Department of Social Service. Mr. Rich holds a master's degree in mental health counseling with the Western University, a Bachelor of Sociology from Columbia International University, an associate in the public service for Midland Technical College. Mr. Rich has more than 30 years experience in the human resources field. He serves in many different capacities. Mr. Rich motto is, leave people better than the way you found them. And I would like to take this opportunity right now, without further ado, to introduce to bring forth to you Mr. Russell Rich.
Thank you. Thank you. I don't know how dynamic I will be, uh, but I'm hoping that this will be informative for you. First of all, I want to say that I really appreciate the fact y'all invited us to this. Uh, at Adult Advocacy at DSS, over the past year, we have really been working, actually really started before that. We were really working to try to get out into the community. One of the things is that we found that the community really doesn't know a lot about what we do at Adult Advocacy, or as a lot of other people here, Adult Protective Services. So we've been really striving to get out into the community, meeting our consumers, meeting people that are in the community, so we can bring them a better understanding of what we're doing. And these kind of platforms here are great. I love them. I'm a people person. I love to get out and talk. This is pretty new to me here. This presentation I've done, normally we were doing it in person. So this is a little new doing it this way, but we'll figure it out. We'll move through it. I can just tell you right now, I am not the most technology advanced person in the world. I'm just an old country guy. I grew up in Columbia. My family's from Turbyville, and I live in Sumter. So there you go. But we'll work through it. We'll figure it out. So I guess the first thing we want to start with is I'm going to go ahead and try to share the screen. And we'll see if we can get this thing to work like it's supposed to. It didn't want to work right the other day, and we had to do all kind of little things, but let's see if we can get it going.
Just don't forget to click the little button on the left side for sound.
Yes. Okay, well, I think we got part of it. We're going to share this. And I guess, is everybody, okay, there we go. Is everybody seeing this okay?
Yes, very good.
Okay, all right. Like I said, I'm Russell Rich. I'm Director of County Operations for Adult Protective Services, or Adult Advocacy. 46 counties I work with. Adult Advocacy over the past 4 or 5 years has really been going through a lot of changes. So what this is, or really what I want to do tonight, is one, give you an idea of what we do. What's our guiding principles? What are some of the laws we go by? But also, oh, let me see, what is this? But also, talk a little bit about abuse. Abuse is I'm trying to figure the way to say it. It is our least reported, and we'll talk about that. But it has the most impact on our vulnerable adults. So we're going to talk a little bit about that tonight. But we're going to start out here. We're going to go to the next screen. Okay, well, let me try it this way. Okay, so what is Adult Protective Services, or what is Adult Advocacy? Now there again, I say this is a lot different than the way we usually do it. Usually what I like to do is give everybody the opportunity to kind of ask questions as we go along. And I know in this format, it's a little bit difficult, but I'm going to try and give some time to where we can kind of ask questions, because I'm a person that I kind of learn by asking questions and doing. So I don't ever want somebody, I don't want to move on through something and somebody not quite understand what I'm talking about, or have a question and then later on not be able to have it answered. So we'll kind of work through that as we go along. But to start off with, what is Adult Advocacy, Adult Protective Services? And adult protective services are services with the objective to protect a vulnerable adult from harm. These services include, but are not limited to, evaluating the need for protective services, securing and coordinating existing services, and arranging for living quarters, obtaining financial benefits to which a vulnerable adult is entitled, and securing medical services, supplies, and legal services. Now, to kind of talk about that, that's a lot. That's a lot right there. But in a nutshell, what our job is at Adult Protective Services or Adult Advocacy, we are mandated by the law to, number one, investigate allegations of abuse, neglect, exploitation. That's what we're tasked to do. We investigate those allegations, and it's for a vulnerable adult. Now, if we find that the abuse, neglect, exploitation occurred, then our next step is to look for services. Now, there's a real important piece right here where it says coordinating existing services. One of our main tasks is, once we have said, okay, more than likely, we know that the abuse, neglect, or exploitation of this vulnerable adult has happened, then it's our job at that point to either provide protective services or any services which will be able to meet the client's needs. Now, we don't provide those services. Those services are often provided, or not often, but all the time, they're provided outside of our agency. We're considered a coordinating agency. In other words, when we get a report in, we investigate, we say, okay, this client could benefit from some services. We then go out and find those services for that client and bring those services to that client. It can be any number of things. They're, again, ranging for living quarters. We have had clients that lost their homes. They are vulnerable adults. And we're going to talk a little bit more about vulnerable adults and actually what makes somebody vulnerable in a minute. But they may have lost their home, or they don't have a place to stay. So we'll sometimes find new places for them to stay. We'll find apartments, those kind of things. Obtaining financial benefits. One of the issues we always deal with, and we have a lot of clients that we work on this for them, is Medicaid. We'll have a lot of clients that don't have any income. They don't have any health insurance. They come to us with nothing. So a lot of times we'll work to get them Social Security benefits. We'll work to get them Medicaid, those kind of things. We also work to get medical services. Sometimes we'll work with the hospitals. We'll work with doctors to try and get medical services into a home, supplies, those kind of things. But we'll also work with legal services. One of the things that we do a lot of when we're working with clients that have a lot of assets or a lot of money or houses or properties or things, we're not allowed to touch those. So what we do a lot of times is we will do either payees, or we will do conservators, and then in some cases guardians. So we will work with different attorneys to get those services provided. Comes to mind, we have many clients that wind up coming to us because they have Alzheimer's, and they're at a stage now to where they cannot handle their finances. And in some cases, they're being exploited by family members, friends, people in the community. So what we'll do at that time is we will set up a conservator for them who then can handle those finances for them. So that way they have the means to have their needs met. So that's just a little bit of what we do. Now that's to tell you the truth, it's a small part, but it's real important that these services are available. That's one of the main things, I guess, barriers we run into a lot of times, is that oftentimes some of these services, depending on where you live in the state, some of these services may not be available. So that's a huge concern for us. But regardless of that, we have to do what we need to do to get that client where they're safe and where their needs are being met. So let's move on to the next. Okay, a vulnerable adult, when I was talking a little bit about what is a vulnerable adult, this is what we operate under, the Omnibus Adult Protection Act of South Carolina. This tells us really, I mean, it's not really a strong definition. I think we can make it stronger, but it's what we got. But I think it does a pretty good job of explaining what a vulnerable adult is. A vulnerable adult is a person 18 years or older who has a physical condition or mental condition which substantially impairs the person from adequately providing for his or her own care or protection. This includes impairments due to infirmities of aging, including but not limited to organic brain damage, advanced age, physical, mental, or emotional dysfunction, but legal competency is not an issue for consideration. Okay, now let me break down a couple little parts here on this. Of course, the 18 years old is pretty self-explanatory. You got to be 18 years old. Now, a lot of times this is where we'll get calls or we'll get questions about, well, I know so-and-so lives down the street. They have these issues. This is what's going on, da, 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 da. And then the report may not be accepted because it doesn't meet the criteria. Now, when we talk about a physical condition or a mental condition which substantially impairs, those are our key words there, substantially impairs. In other words, that condition has to cause this person to not be able to provide either care or protection for themselves. Protection for themselves. So when we talk about conditions, we're talking about Alzheimer's. We're talking about folks that have who may be paralyzed. Now, just because you might be paralyzed, that does not mean you're necessarily a vulnerable adult. Just because you are blind, that doesn't make you necessarily a vulnerable adult. Now, you can have those, and you do have some vulnerabilities, but that doesn't make you a vulnerable adult. We've had a lot of reports where folks will call in, and a lot of times it's, it's somebody who has dealings with this person. Their heart is in the right place, and they're calling in a report because they feel this person maybe, for whatever reason, needs some extra help. They may be blind, they may be deaf, and they're calling these reports in, and they're doing it from a good place. But because you have these infirmities does not necessarily make you a vulnerable adult. There again, you can have these vulnerabilities and still not be considered a vulnerable adult. So when you look at those, the infirmities, now when we start talking about aging, there again, let me tell you what, my great-grandmother lived till she was 103 years old. She was sharp as a tack till the day she died, and she could do really her own stuff. She lived in Turbyville. She would go out in the mornings at 100 years old and would chop wood. Literally, she would chop little pieces of wood for her potbelly stove. And I'll never forget, one day the preacher came over to the house. He lived right next door, and told Miss Lizzie, "You can't be out here doing this. This is dangerous. You're 100 years old chopping wood." And she promptly explained to him to mind his business and go back to his house. So just because she was advanced age, she was still able to meet her needs. And my great-grandmother could provide protection for herself. She was very feisty. So that right there, oftentimes when we're looking at people who are up in age, just because they are up in age in their 80s, 90s, and sometimes even in the hundreds, that does not necessarily, there again, make them vulnerable. They can have these some vulnerabilities, but they still don't meet that definition. Now, legal competency, that's a legal term that can only be addressed by the courts. we deal a lot in two areas. And really, when adult protective services, and when it comes down to it, when the rubber hits the road, we deal in two things. We deal in competency and capacity. Now, those are two different things. Competency is a legal definition that is determined by courts. And it means that at that certain point, you are no longer competent to handle your affairs. You see that a lot of times in folks that have advanced stages of Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, some diseases like that. So that's a legal term that can only be determined by a judge through probate court. Now, when you're talking about capacity, that is a medical term, which the doctors then can say about that. This will happen to folks that are maybe had a stroke, and now they've lost the capacity to use one side of their body or their lower half of their body. They've lost their capacity to do their what we call ADLs, which is active daily living skills. They may no longer be able to feed themselves. They may no longer be able to transfer, to use the bathroom, to bathe. They've lost that capacity to do that. So when we're looking at this, we're not looking at the competency, because the competency is a legal term. What we look at for this right here is more or less the capacity of the person. Now, this is one people have some difficulty with. If you have a question, I want to just kind of say, hey, throw it out there right quick. I want to make sure everybody kind of gets this piece. Any questions? Okay, well then I'm gonna move on to the next. Okay, so now what typologies do we investigate? Typologies is basically that, it's abuse, neglect, or exploitation. First, and this is where we're gonna spend some time right here on physical abuse. We're gonna kind of really talk about this. I've got some stuff I really want to kind of sink in about abuse, because abuse there again, like I said before, it's one of our least reported, but it has the most impact. And I think you'll see what I'm talking about when we kind of get into it. Okay, so physical abuse means intentionally inflicting or allowing to be inflicted physical injury or vulnerable adult by the act and failure to act. So let's unpack that for a second. So what is physical abuse? That means somebody's intentionally or they are allowing physical injury to happen to a vulnerable adult, or they are failing to protect. So when you're talking about this, you're talking about somebody who is either one, hitting, kicking, slapping a vulnerable adult, or knows it's going on, is seeing it going on, and is failing to act or provide protection for that vulnerable adult. So physical abuse includes, but is not limited to, slapping, hitting, kicking, biting, choking, pinching, burning, actual or attempted sexual battery, which falls under sexual abuse, as defined by the South Carolina Code 16-3-651, use of medications outside the standards of reasonable medical practice for the purpose of controlling behavior. Now that's one that's happens a lot when you have folks that are bedbound or that are on some medications. That's becoming more and more common, to tell you the truth. We're seeing more and more of those kind of being reported. Most of those are coming from doctor's offices now, because the client or patient will go in to the doctor's office, and the doctors will run, most of the time will run blood levels, and they'll find that, you know, maybe the morphine levels shouldn't be as high as they are, or they'll find that their medication, which is being prescribed, those markers are not there. So that's becoming more and more prevalent. Physical abuse also includes the use of a restrictive or physically intrusive procedure to control behavior for the purpose of punishment, except that a therapeutic procedure prescribed by a licensed physician or other qualified professional, or that is part of a written plan of care by a licensed physician or other qualified professional is not considered physical abuse. That's a lot to say right there. But basically what it's saying is this: you will often have folks, you'll see this a lot of times in folks that wander. They may have dementia issues and they wander, and they will often walk out of the home and then wind up missing. And then the family will find them and bring them back. But guess what? The very next evening, or as soon as somebody's back's turned, they're gone again. Now, what they will do sometimes is they will take them or they will strap them to a chair. Or they may not strap them to a chair. They may put a lock on their door to where they can't go out the door. So both of those can be considered physical abuse, especially the strapping to the chair. We see a lot of that, especially, like I said, in case men see a lot of that. Now, if the client, if it's prescribed by a licensed physician, and this is one area that often we'll get a report on, that a client is in a facility and the doctor, excuse me, has ordered a belt or something to kind of keep a client, now that's different. It is being prescribed by a doctor for therapeutic procedures, okay? So physical abuse does not include altercations or acts of assault between vulnerable adults. Sometimes we'll get reports from nursing homes or other facilities where you'll have two vulnerable adults that have gotten into a fight or an argument, and they're wanting to make a report, and unfortunately those aren't reportable actions. So take a sip of water. All right, moving on. Okay, so talking about vulnerable adult abuse in America, these are some numbers that come from the National Council on Aging. These numbers are probably about 2 years old. And the reason we really haven't updated them is because COVID happened. And across the board, any kind of reporting is down. So numbers, but I still think they're pretty accurate. I know our numbers for the last year have been way down. Number of reports we got dropped significantly during COVID, and there's reasons for that. One of the reasons for that is because then you didn't have a lot of people going into homes anymore. You didn't have folks that would normally be around and be able to witness some of the behaviors or some of the things. They were no longer around, so therefore those reports wasn't getting made. So when you look at this stuff, like I said, remember they're probably about 2 years old, but we've just kind of lost a year. So, but I still think they're pretty accurate. So approximately 1 in 10 Americans 60 and older have experienced some form of elder abuse. So when you think about that, 1 in 10, that's not a high number, but to me, that's pretty relevant. I mean, you think about it, that's 1 out of 10 Americans 60 or older. Abusers are both male and female. Almost 60% of abuse cases, a family member is involved. 2/3 are adult children or spouses. This one right here, I have a 98-year-old grandmother that I'm her power of attorney. I would never think about hurting my grandmother, ever. She has Alzheimer's, and believe me, she was difficult. She's still alive. She's in a nursing home now, but she was very difficult. But at no time did it ever cross my mind to do this. And I'm going to tell you, this is one of the most heartbreaking things when you see children that abuse their parents. It just really, I really have a issue with that, and I have said things before that need to be said about it. It's a real problem to me. Spouses as well. It's really an issue. There again, elders who have been abused. Now this number, when I read this one at first, I was pretty shocked. But it's actually, I mean, it makes a lot of sense. Elders who have been abused have a 300% higher risk of death when compared to those that have not been mistreated. Unfortunately, this is something we see a lot of times, especially in elder abuse. A lot of times these elderly have been abused for years, and unfortunately, by the time it gets to us, in some cases, it's too late. But, you know, that number seems kind of excessive, but it's actually pretty accurate when you look at the numbers. In the state of South Carolina, only 6.7 of all reported cases are abuse, second least reported. That's what I was talking about earlier. It's probably one of the least reported, typologies we have. It's just not one that gets a lot of attention for numerous reasons. The lowest that we get is exploitation. Exploitation, when I say I mean actual exploitation, where somebody is actually, using a client's funds for their own gain, or actually using the person at times for their own gain. But that's one of the lowest we get. And it's kind of baffling at times, because you would think that you would hear more or it would be reported more, but it's just not. And there's a lot of reasons for that. So let me go to the next screen and let's talk about some of those reasons. So first of all, reasons it's not really reported is there's a fear of retaliation from the caregiver. A lot of times you will hear, when you talk to family members who have a report of abuse, you will talk to the victim or the vulnerable adult, and they'll tell you nothing happened. No, nothing happened. No, they didn't do that. No, she's never hit me. No, she doesn't do that. And you can have a lot of evidence. You can have doctor's reports. You can have firsthand knowledge, but the vulnerable adult will say, no, it didn't happen. And so why is that? Well, there again, it's a fear of retaliation. A lot of times what you will hear for retaliation is you will hear daughters, sons, and unfortunately it does wind up being a lot of times the daughters, because more than likely the caretaker for that adult will be a daughter. That's just one of those. Daughters are more likely to care for an aging parent than a son is. Not saying a son doesn't, but the majority of them are females. But you'll hear the daughters tell stuff, and I've had doctors tell me that, they've overheard the daughters or the caretakers tell the vulnerable adult, if you say anything about what's happening, then you're going to sit in your own mess. Now, for somebody who is in a wheelchair and cannot provide care for themselves, and I'm sorry, but some of the stuff kind of does get a little graphic at times, because I want everybody to really kind of understand why it is so important to recognize abuse and to report abuse. But you'll often hear that. And when the caregivers are out of the picture, a lot of times the vulnerable adult will then begin to tell you about what's happened to them. And I'm going to tell you, I have heard stories that are absolutely, it's horrific. And what caregivers will do to vulnerable adults, especially their elderly parents, grandparents, or other relatives. Another reason is embarrassment. A lot of times you will have this elder who is, all their life they've worked, they've maintained a house, They have cared for their children. They have done all these things. Sometimes they are well known in the community. They are well respected, and they have a sense of pride. And it is embarrassing to say, yes, I'm a victim of abuse. And so a lot of times they won't say anything because they don't want to have that embarrassment. They don't want to feel as though somebody's looking at them and judging them. So they just won't say anything. Disbelief or denial. This kind of goes to that that embarrassment as well. They're not going to say it because they've been told a lot of times, nobody's going to believe you. Nobody's going to believe you. Who's going to believe you? You have Alzheimer's. Nobody's going to believe what you're saying. So don't even say nothing. And they begin to believe that. Or they just become there in denial. Well, yes, she does hit me or he hits me, but it's not really that bad. It's not that bad. When he hit me, it was because of something I was doing. I didn't help him enough, or I didn't help her enough. So he just got frustrated and hit me, but it wasn't really a hard hit. It was just kind of as I've heard, a love tap. He didn't really mean it, or she didn't really mean it. And then finally, and there again, it's finally, but not the end. There's other reasons, but we're going to stick with these four. Cultural or miseducation about what abuse is. That is a huge one. A lot of times they don't understand, or families don't understand, that what they're doing is abuse. Said earlier about, locking somebody in a room. We had a client one time, family that we were working with. The client lived in extreme poverty. And unfortunately, they did not have the resources to get the care that this person's mother needed. There again, she had Alzheimer's. So in order to keep mom from wandering, they put a lock on her door, and they would lock the door from the outside. So there was no possible way for mom to get out of the room. She couldn't get out. Now that right there in itself is a safety issue, because if the house caught on fire or something happened, there's no way she can get to safety. But they just didn't understand why that wasn't appropriate. Why that, and there again, poverty is a lot of times, folks that are living in extreme poverty, we find have come up with these solutions, and they just don't know that those aren't appropriate. So then we have to, so instead of trying to punish them, what we try to do at that point is we try to educate them and show them that is a better way. And that's where we go back to trying to find resources or services that will be able to help them. In this case, we were lucky enough, we were able to get her into a facility that we were able to get her Medicaid. And there again, we got her into a facility that had a locked unit that was for Alzheimer's patients. And she actually went there and thrived. And the family was just absolutely ecstatic about that, because they didn't want to hurt mom. They didn't want to do this kind of stuff. They just didn't know what else to do. So a lot of times that's what a lot of abuse is. Now, that's not saying that there's those folks. I've also dealt with folks that they mean to do stuff to mom. A lot of times you'll hear there again, retaliation from caregiver. Another thing you'll see a lot of times is when you're talking about mothers and children, you'll see a mother who was abusive when they were children, and now the mother has become basically the child. And so the child has now become the adult and is now the caregiver. So I've had people tell me literally, you don't know what I went through when I was a child by her. She deserves everything she's getting. So there's a retaliation from the child now to the mother or the father because of abuse from the past. So it is very complex. There's a lot of reasons out there. These are really the top 4 reasons, like I said, that we hear a lot of. So I want to stop right now and just say if there's any questions. Anybody have any questions?
I think Ms. Barbara's trying to unmute. There we go.
We have some questions for you.
Okay.
Okay. Our first question is, what is the punishment for elder abuse that ends in death?
I'm going to be honest with you, and it frustrates me, but it really is not very bad. I'm just going to be honest with you. And I'm gonna say it like this. It's the only way I know to say it. It sounds really harsh, but I heard this in a training or a meeting I was in. But you know, it really kind of hit me, and it hit home to me. The reality of it is this: when a child dies by abuse or neglect, you see a lot of action. You see it in the newspapers, you see it on the TV, you see it everywhere. And there's a lot of outrage. There's a lot of, we're going to change the system, we're going to do this. And then you see some things happen. We saw that on our child welfare side at DSS. Unfortunately, when a 80-year-old lady who has Alzheimer's dies from abuse or neglect, there is outrage for a short period of time, but then it goes away. And it's not, it's for whatever reason, it's sort of like, and then people start to kind of make excuses. Well, she was 80. I just know just from looking at the news here lately, I believe there was a lady or a gentleman that died. There was a short little write-up on it, and that was it. And that was it. It wasn't a whole lot at all. And then when they go to court, unfortunately, the laws aren't very strong. We need stronger laws. A lot of times what will happen is they'll do the plea down to a lesser charge. And sometimes they get very little, if any, prison terms. I mean, it really depends on how bad it was, and that it should, to me, it should never be about that. But a lot of times it's how bad was it. If it's a case where, you know, somebody had Alzheimer's or somebody had a terminal illness, a lot of times our solicitors won't pursue that to the fullest measure, because a good defense attorney can get in and argue, well, this person, you can't really prove that the abuse and neglect killed this person because they had this terminal illness. So we really need stronger punishments. We need stronger laws, if that kind of answers that question.
Yes. Have a few other questions for you. Do the abuser, when found guilty, are they asked to register as an abuser?
No. In the state of South Carolina, we do not have an abuse registry for adults. Now, there is some legislation out there that they're wanting to pass. We don't really have, we can go either way with it. The only thing I would say about it, if we're going to have a registry, we really need to have the funding behind it to make sure it's done right. But we could go either way, but there is no registry in South Carolina. That's one of the biggest issues too. We will often have what I call a lot of times is your frequent flyers. You'll have folks that will bounce around from home health agency to home health agency. They'll be over in Georgetown County this week. They'll get caught abusing or get accused of abusing a vulnerable adult or client, and then they'll get fired, and then they'll go over to Florence County and take a job, and there's really no way for that job over there to know what happened over here. So yeah, it's a real problem because I call them, you know, I've seen reports on the same person literally in 4 or 5 different counties. So yeah, it's kind of like, you know, when does this stop? When are they not going to be able to hire this person anymore? But unfortunately, it's not like the child side where you have that registry that you can pull up. We don't have that.
Okay. When you're considering guardianship or custody, do you first have a court determined competency?
Yes. What we always want to do, we never want to, you know, our focus a lot of times is on the client because clients have a right to self-determination. So anytime we have a client who we think may not, or the doctor's saying, I mean, we'll have a lot of times we have a client at the hospital will say, oh, well, this client is, you know, they're incapacitated. They can't make decisions for themselves. Well, you know, we have to ask the question is, well, what can't they do for themselves? And that's only a fair question. But the other question, and I think even fairer question is, well, what does the client want? Because we always want to do what that client wants to do and what's going to be in their best interest. We're not in the business of forcing people into services. If you don't want our services, you can refuse our services. So that's that client's right to self-determination. So a lot of times what we'll do then is we'll see about having evaluation done to determine whether that person is actually able to make those decisions. Now, if 2 doctors certify that a person is incapacitated, then we can kind of move forward. But we're always going to err on the client's right to decide for themselves what they want to do. Now, a lot of times what we'll do is we'll work with that client to try to meet their wants, and we'll do it until it is shown without a doubt that this client cannot be safe in that situation. So anytime we have a conservator or a guardian, we always want to make sure, and we always try to make sure that we have enough evidence to show that this client is absolutely unable. They have been either deemed incompetent or they have been deemed incapacitated.
Okay. Might medical abuse also be withholding of prescribed medication to the
Yes. There again, that kind of goes back to others. So we're seeing a lot of either using more medication or under medicated. Now, I will tell you one of the big areas that is over the past, I guess about 4 or 5, maybe 6 years, is the use of opioids. And what we found is that you have 2 situations going on. You'll have caregivers that will withhold medication, but you'll have big caregivers that will give too much medication. So what they'll do is a lot of times we'll see these folks, they have pain, they have arthritis, something like that. They've been seeing these doctors for years. Doctor basically is prescribing them hydrocodones, different kind of pain relievers. And what you'll see is an addiction develop. And what happens is then the caregiver will use that addiction against the client. And what they'll do is they'll tell the client things like, okay, and this is a kind of a real example we ran into in one of our counties where the caregiver was using the client's oxycodones as a way to get money out of the client. So the doctor would prescribe them, but then the client would not give her that. She would say, okay, unless you give me, you know, $5,000, you're not going to get your medication. And that's what was going on. Now, the way we found out is because when the client went back into the doctor, of course, they do blood checks. And what they're doing is they're looking for those levels. They found that her levels should not have been where they were. So at that point, we turned that over to law enforcement, because now that's a criminal act. And we turned that over to law enforcement, and then they pursued that. I think they're still working on that. But then you'll have the opposite, to where you'll have a caregiver who is just tired of dealing with them, basically, is from what they say, and they'll give them more medication than they're supposed to and basically knock them out. So yeah, medical abuse is really one that is growing. It's been growing for the past 5-6 years, actually, to tell you the truth.
Okay, I have one more concern as it relates to when you're found guilty and to register as an abuser.
Mhm.
And I know you went over that, but in the present time, what is being done about this?
Well, like I said, there is a bill. It kind of got stalled out last year, and I think they're bringing it up this year. That will create a adult registry, very similar to what we have on the child side. So it will basically be similar to that, to where when these adults or these caregivers are convicted of abuse, neglect, or exploitation, they'll go on this registry. Jobs will be able to pull it up, look, and see they're on this registry. Right now, unfortunately, there's really not a whole lot you can do, because there's no way that you can actually go and check to see if this person has done that. That's why I say I've had one person who's shown up probably in 4 or 5 different counties with abuse allegations, working for, doing home health type stuff. So, we go in, and of course they've already packed up and gone. We turn it over to law enforcement. Law enforcement investigates it, but oftentimes there again, it kind of goes back to the client doesn't want to press charges, or is afraid to press charges, and sometimes embarrassed to press charges. So this person just goes around and just continues to do this. So that's why I say it's important. We really need something like that we can track these folks. Because right now there's really no way of being able to track these folks.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, well, let's move on to the next. So, when we talk about abuse, there's really 6 theories. We kind of look at this stuff and, why do people abuse? Why do they do it? And I'm going to show a video here in a little bit. I want to get you to start thinking about this. I want you to start thinking about what an abuser looks like, because we have this kind of perception of what an abuser looks like. And I think you're going to be a little surprised when you see it. But talking about the theories of abuse, you got the pathological caregiver. These abusers exhibit deviant behaviors. These are folks that I'm just going to say it like this. They're just horrible people. They're just horrible people. They're out to hurt people. That's what they do. They have something in them. My grandmother would always say that she got the devil in her, and that's it. They're just out there to hurt people. You have life crisis model. So excessive number or magnitude of life-changing events occur, a constant state of crisis within the family. A lot of times you'll have families that, especially in certain cultures, that live together. They have multiple generations in one house, and it's like that household is in a constant state of crisis. They're always going through some crisis, being financial. It can be anything, any kind of crisis, arguments, anything. But that will often lead to abuse happening. Socialization of aggression. That's intrafamily violence is transmitted from one generation to another. When I was talking earlier about the daughters or the sons who were abused by mom or dad, and now mom and dad are older, they can't really care for themselves. So now the son or daughter is now their caretaker, and they now begin to put the same violence or aggression on them that they received as children. So it's just a repeating cycle. It just goes on and on and on. And it's a very, very hard cycle to break, because a lot of times what will happen is they get in this, and that's the only way they know how to do it. Some very similar with state of crisis. When you live in crisis for so long, you don't know any other way. And I've actually seen families that lived in crisis for so long that when there was no crisis, they would literally create crisis because they didn't know how to live or exist without it. So those kind of go some kind of together. Intergenerational conflict. There again, personality conflicts, past disagreements. Hostility worsens over time. As you can see, those three are kind of right there together. They're all kind of fit, kind of meshed together. There's crisis in the home. There's violence in the home. There's conflict. Mom was an abuser. Dad was an abuser. Now they just carry this from generation to generation to generation, and they don't know how to live any other way. Dependency, the dependent relationship between family members. They become codependent. Mom depends so heavily on the daughter for her care, to be her caretaker, that she's willing to put up with some abuse or neglect. Daughter is so dependent on mom's income, or mom just having that attention or that need for to feel like she's doing something for somebody, that she is willing to put up with some of mom's abuse. So it's this real complicated relationship that these families have, that they cannot break away from each other. It's really, and there again, it's really difficult to get them out of these cycles. It takes a lot of therapy. Like I said, my background is mental health, and I've always heard, and we've always said that for every 3 months of abuse or neglect, it's about 3 years of therapy, and that's about right. It takes a long time to move past this stuff. And then the human ecological view, which is James I mess his name up every time, Gabarino. His human ecological view presents the view of the incompetent caregiver. His focus is more on child abuse. There again, it kind of goes back to the same other ones, to where the caregiver doesn't feel they have the skills to provide care, but they're not going to admit it. And they're like, I'm doing the best I can. And they don't want to be told that what they're doing is harmful. We see that a lot of times, to where the caregiver just does not have the skills to take care of that adult. So it becomes difficult because they don't want to admit that. that they don't have those skills. And they'll tell you, and they'll get real angry. They'll say, look, I'm doing the best I can here. What do you want from me? I can only do what I can do. And until they realize and are able to accept, and it's not a bad thing to say, and I'll say to them at this point, look, it's okay. You are doing the best you can, but there's better ways, and I want to help you learn those ways. But they become very defensive. So that's really, there's 6 theories. Just kind of keep those in mind, and I think they're pretty accurate. So let's go on. Okay, this video right now, I want to kind of show you this. I'm going to see, I believe last time we tried to play it, it wouldn't play from here. So let me see if I can get this to go. Try this one. I think this is the one. Okay, if you can't hear it, Ms. Simpson, let me know.
I can't hear it not yet. It's not playing yet.
Okay. Can y'all hear me?
I can hear.
Okay.
The first time that I hit my mom, I wish I would have told someone sooner. We who abuse hide it.
Nancy Hansen lived together with her mother for most of her life.
And we had wonderful times together. We were close, we enjoyed the same things, and we were a team.
Long before she died, Nancy's mother had a sudden stroke, and Nancy became her caregiver. Nancy's life would never be the same.
The doctor told me that she would need 24-hour care. Oh yeah, I can do it, and we had a bedpan, and we had washcloths and everything, and they said that they would send out nurses' aides. I wasn't too bad then. I thought I was doing pretty well. And but as that time went on, I began to deteriorate. I deteriorated because when I would once get awake and the incontinence, both bowel and urinary, was getting ahead of me, I could not get back to sleep. And I started doing laundry at night and stuff, and we'd get her all cleaned up. Sometimes my husband and I would just have to stick her in the bathtub because my husband had rigged up a bell where she could just press it, but she would press it after she was through with everything. So it was just a constant routine. It was like a squirrel's cage for me. I began having very suspicious, angry feelings that my mom was maybe doing some of this stuff on purpose. And that was my first very clear warning, because I lost this. I was beginning to expect normal reactions from someone who was no longer normal. And it got to the point where she didn't any longer want me to take care of her because I was beginning the psychological abuse. The things I said to her were unforgivable. I told her that her brain was like a sieve, that she couldn't remember. And I said, if you don't stop messing up, we're going to stick you in a nursing home. Or, Mom, I'm thinking very seriously about making you lie in it. And I know that you're not going to like that at all. And she would cry and she would say, honey, I don't do it on purpose. And I'd say, get real. And I will never, ever forget the first time that I hit my mom. I was totally losing control. I am a very organized person. I was becoming very angry that I could no longer organize. She would be so slow in getting her clothes on, and then she wanted her makeup put on. And she wasn't always maybe cooperating with me while I was putting on her makeup. And sometimes I would take her face in my hands, and I was entirely too rough. And I'd say, put your head up. I can't, the light, it's dark, Mom, or whatever. I don't see well enough to put your makeup on. I didn't belt down a few straight Jack Daniels and then start in on my mom. And I was always careful never to use my fist. Never. I could possibly have killed her because I was so angry. And I have very strong hands, and I have to be careful. There was always, to a certain extent, I know now that I was always bridled. I never really did everything that I could have done. Even when I see that now with the passage of time, there was always a little control. But then sometimes after the makeup ordeal was over, I would shake her. I would say, will you please? Mom, I can't stand much more of this. And I would shake her. And then we'd lose more time because then she'd have to sit down and she'd say, you're hurting me. You're hurting my neck. And little did I know I could have caused another stroke by doing that. I made sure that when I hit her with the flat of my hand so that there wouldn't be any bruises. When I would have to take her to the doctor, I was sometimes scared because I would hit her in the back. And I thought, what if he sees some bruises? My God, what am I going to do? I was afraid of prosecution. I was afraid of maybe I'm losing it. And what if they put me in, what if I really do go off the beam? And then my mom and my husband are left. The two people I love the most. How can I do this? And I'm being buried. I can't get out. And I can't go on. I can't go forward. I can't do anything. All I can do is kill myself. Then you're really going to wimp out, right? Where the hell was I going to go? We who abuse hide it. We are the biggest actors and the biggest hiders in all the world.
Wow. Now I use this video because I think it's pretty powerful. It really falls into, if you listen to Nancy, first of all, Nancy is not what a lot of folks would think of as an abuser. A lot of times when I do this presentation in person, I see looks on people's faces and they're just in shock. The first time I ever saw this video, I was in shock. I was just like, no way. There's no way. But then to hear her talk, it's really powerful. And she's right. Abusers are the best hiders. They hide what they do. And as you heard in there, you heard some of going back to some of the reasons here for reporting, underreporting. If you see some of the stuff here, it's there. She talked a lot about the state of crisis, that stress that she was under, no sleeping, not just, as she said, feeling like she was being buried. Those are the kind of things I have probably heard what this lady said. I've probably heard this same speech 100 times, literally, throughout my time in Kershaw County and moving up to the state office. Abuse is out there. I really want people to understand is don't get your mind stuck on that this over here is what an abuser looks like. An abuser is not necessarily a young male or female. It's not necessarily a male or female who would fall into that deviant range. It does not follow poverty. It does not follow culture. It can show its head in a number of ways. So kind of moving on, and does anybody have any comments about that? In the sense that we're doing okay on time?
We're doing pretty good on time. We do have a few questions and concerns.
Okay.
Going back to what we talked about before the video, in order to track a repeat abuser, isn't there a system like background check or something similar? In the United Methodist Church, our Safe Sanctuary processes and cover that by including vulnerable adults in our category for vetting volunteers who are serving others.
A lot of those background checks, those are through law enforcement. So that is in some cases, that's not really like if you went out and wanted to start a home health agency, if you have never been arrested for it, then you wouldn't show up on a register. You wouldn't show up on a background check. A lot of times, the only ones that will show up are the ones that have been arrested. And like I said, a lot of times what you'll have happen is you'll have these folks that'll bounce around. They never get arrested. That's the problem. They're never arrested. The solicitors, whatever, they don't feel they either have enough to press charges or they just don't feel that they have a good enough case. So these folks never get charged with a crime. So until they get charged with a crime, they're not going to show up on the background checks. Under the registry, like child welfare, if you are within family courts where we operated, if we find that, and there again, in APS, we don't name perpetrators. What we do is we substantiate that this person is vulnerable and that the abuse and neglect more than likely occurred. Now, once we've done that, the judge then can say, when we have a registry, the judge could then possibly say, okay, as they do in child welfare, you're going to be on the registry, and then they'll have to be on that registry. But that's only, unless they have been arrested for it, you won't see it on any kind of background check.
Wow. If the United Methodist Women could get, is there a bill number that we can get so we could maybe have we could advocate for the bill to make a difference with our government legislators?
I don't have the bill number per se, but I would encourage, yes, call your legislator. Call them and tell them that, that the adult registry is important. Some of the things we always advocate for is for resources. We need resources. One of the things we have right now is the only way of protecting folks in some cases that have to be removed from the home is, and I hate doing it, but it's really our only option is motels. And it's really hard at times for us. We don't like it. We wish we had something else, but we have to take somebody who's been abused, neglected, or exploited out of their home and put them in a motel with a sitter because we don't have beds to place them in, say into nursing homes or assisted livings. So one of the things we have out there we're asking for funding for emergency beds. So then that way when we have these situations. These folks aren't going from their home into a motel where there's a sitter there, where these perpetrators, well, we don't say perpetrators, let me take that back, where these caretakers can then come find them. What we want to do is be able to put them into a facility where they can be safe and they can be cared for. So those are two things I would definitely say. Call your legislators and say, look, these are things that are important, and we need these. We need a registry, and we need contract beds. We need beds so we can put these vulnerable adults.
Yes. Then I have one more question for you. Is
Okay.
there respite care for those who are caregivers? And if it can be very overwhelming task from day in and day out for
Yes,
those.
it is. I'm sorry.
And then that was this and no, I say for the people that actually in there taking care of those vulnerable adults, is there any type of care that we can give those caregivers?
There are respite programs out there. Problem is, well, and most of those run through the Office on Aging. But those programs, but the sad thing is that they're very underfunded. So they're really not available a lot of times. We run into that to a lot of times. I'm going to tell you, caregiver burnout is very, very real. Very, very real. I'll just give you a kind of personal example. My grandmother, we tried to keep her in her home as long as we possibly could. We wanted to keep her independent. We wanted her to have some independence. It got to a point to where she just couldn't do it anymore. My frustration came because we could see it. Me, my mother, my brothers, my wife, other family members, we could see that she was no longer able, because we saw her pretty much every day. And we could see that she was no longer able to do the things that she normally could do, but trying to get the doctor to help us, he didn't want to do it. He was, no, I'm not going to do that. Can't do that. And eventually it just got to the point to where her Alzheimer got so bad that it pretty much, say it like that, it just kind of worked itself out. And she wound up falling and breaking a hip, and she wound up going into the nursing home. And then that was kind of there. She was kind of there, and then we didn't have to fight that fight anymore. But I'm going to tell you this, that 2 years was absolutely exhausting. It was absolutely exhausting. And there again, I wasn't living there. But, driving from Columbia to Sumter Sumter to Columbia every day to check on her, making sure she had food in the house, it was absolutely exhausting. And I did it by myself for a little over a year and a half. We finally moved her here to Sumter, to a apartment that wasn't very far from our house, because there again, I thought it would be easier. I wouldn't have to travel, but let me tell you what, it even became more exhausting, because then it was just this and that. She would put, clothes in the sink and cut the water on and forget she cut the water on. She flooded the apartment like 3 times. And then we had to get the apartment fixed. It was just a constant thing, and it was just exhausting. So caregiver burnout is very real. The problem is, there again, it goes back to resources. There's just not enough resources or funding for programs that deal with adults. It's just it's just not there. We desperately need it. Desperately need it. We need funding. We need funding for programs. Right now we use sitter services a lot of times when we'll have clients in our custody, and those sitters are there they can provide some things for that client, but we can't put somebody who is bedbound into a motel. We can't put somebody who has mental health issues, have behavior health issues or really severe medical issues, we can't put them in a motel with a sitter. So a lot of times these folks are stuck sitting in ERs, and the hospitals are calling, wanting us to remove these folks from the hospital. They're threatening to put them into the lobby. They're threatening to put them into the parking lot. And it's very difficult because we don't have anything else for them. And it's a constant, this is just a constant battle. So, but if there could, funding, that's what we need for those programs. There again, like I said, there's some programs through Office on Aging, but they're very limited, very limited.
Okay. Okay. That was good information. I don't think we have any more questions for you. We're getting down near to the end of our program.
Okay, well, I'm going to kind of jump on through this, and we'll get on through this real quick, and then I'm going to try and save a few minutes for some questions, more questions. So as we talked about earlier, part of abuse does include sexual battery. This is one that's really not reported a lot. There again, it's kind of self-explanatory. Most folks don't want me to read, so I'm just going to kind of move on past this one. But it's sexual battery, very, very self-explanatory. Neglect by caregiver. There at the end, this is the failure or omission of a caregiver to provide the care, goods, services necessary to maintain the health or safety of the vulnerable adult, including but not limited to food, clothing, medicine, shelters, supervision, medical services. A lot of that stuff we talked about earlier. This may be repeated conduct or a single incident which is produced or can be proven to result in serious physical or psychological harm or substantial risk of death. There again, we kind of talked about some of that earlier. Self-neglect. Now, self-neglect, this is our most reported typology. This is the one everybody calls in, self-neglect. Self-neglect is one of those typologies which it is a very, very, when we talk about the competency and capacity, this is number one right here. Self-neglect includes the inability of the vulnerable adult in the absence of a caretaker to provide for his or own health or safety, which produces or could reasonably be expected to produce serious physical, psychological harm or substantial risk of death. Okay. When we talked about earlier about the capacity and competency, if a client has capacity and they have competency, that's not self-neglect. An alcoholic who chooses to drink and can do for himself is not self-neglect. Self-neglect is a person who has Alzheimer's, who cannot remember to eat, who cannot remember to change their clothes, who cannot provide care or safety for themselves. When we're talking self-neglect, that's what we're talking about. A lot of times we'll get reports that, I went to mom's house the other day and mom didn't have, she didn't have clean clothes on. Well, a lot of times, you go and talk to mom and mom's like, well, I didn't have clean clothes on because I've been out in the garden working, or I've been in the yard, I've been cleaning the house. Of course I wouldn't have had clean clothes on. And we find out mom is competent, mom has capacity, not self-neglect. Exploitation, there again, this is probably our least reported, but this is a very difficult one because there again, it still goes that competency and capacity. If a person is competent, we run into this a lot with banks, where a bank will call a report in because somebody has come in and give somebody some money. And a lot of times it is that person, we'll talk to that person, they'll say, yeah, I know exactly who I gave the money to, and I know exactly why, and it's not your business. So at that point, we're like, okay, yes, ma'am, that's fine. But we'll get a lot of exploitation phone calls that deal with that kind of stuff, where somebody has given money to somebody, Now, that's not to say exploitation doesn't happen, but situations where you have like these, we call romance schemes, where people will meet folks online and they really believe these people are real people and they will send them money. That's not exploitation, that's a crime. And so a lot of times we'll just turn that over to law enforcement. Exploitation is really honestly when you look at somebody who has neither capacity or competency. Those two things have to be in place. Okay, so whenever we go out on reports, people say, well, you know, I've had people ask me before, well, how long does it take y'all to go see somebody? These are basic response times. If it's an abuse, we'll go within 0 to 2 hours, depending on how, or 24 hours, depending on the type of abuse. If they're in the hospital and the hospital saying they were beat up pretty bad, usually it's about 0 to 2. We'll get there pretty quick. Or if we're responding to law enforcement. Neglect is 48, exploitation is 48, self-neglect is 72. What this means is that from the time we get the report until the time we make face-to-face contact. So if we get a report on Sunday, we have 48 hours to make contact with that client. Now, a lot of times the question will come up, what can we do, what we can't do, if we have custody or not custody. If we don't have custody, we can still help clients obtain needed services. Now, if the client is not in our custody, we cannot place, but we still can help the family find placement. There again, help with legal services. All services are coordinated through adult advocacy or voluntary when the client is clear and oriented and has not been determined to be incapacitated by the doctor. Kind of goes back to what we were talking about earlier. There again, we can't make medical decisions for folks. We cannot handle clients' finances. We cannot force people to take services, and we can't make clients follow medical advice. We get a lot of phone calls from doctor's office that wants to make reports because somebody's decided they don't want to take this medication. As long as they're clear and oriented or have their capacity or their competency, they can say, no, I'm not going to take that medication. And then also condemn clients to a lifelong placement. We never want to put somebody in a placement and never give them the option they can ever leave. So a lot of times when our cases are closed, the clients at that point have a right to leave. If they decide, I don't want to stay at this nursing home anymore, I don't want to stay at this assisted living, I want to go here, they can do that. We're not law enforcement. We don't sentence people to jail. You know, we try to find the best possible placement for them that'll meet their needs, but then we give them the option to where, you know, they may improve. And I've seen it before where people improve and no longer need that level of care. And then they go on and do other things. They go to other relatives, they go to other facilities, they go and do what they want to do. And that's what we want. We want people to live their best life. So, you know, that's, like I said, my thing is this: we leave people better than we find them. You know, I don't want to leave somebody the way they are. I want to help them improve, but I don't want to force them to improve if they don't want to. So, all right, that's the end of it. So now, any questions? I know we got just a few minutes left, but any questions you have?
Yes, I have one comment or question for you, and please, Mr. Rich, let's see. Can you comment on the need for volunteer guardians in life for advocacy at our APS cases?
What was that again? For guardian?
Guardian for life.
I can't reach my guardian ad litems.
Yeah, that's it.
Yeah, now that is there again, that's through the Office on Aging. I love working with guardians. You know, we go to court. I think it's a partnership because really we're all in the same thing. I mean, what we really all want the same for that adult. We want that adult to be safe and their needs to be met. Yes, there do need to be, I think, more guardians out there. I know a lot of them that I've worked with in the past and still kind of work with now. Brenda Stalls was over the guardian program at the Office on Aging. Worked with her for years. Great heart for people, but we do need more of that. Now, that's not necessarily anything on our side, but I'm sure they're open to it. I think it's very fulfilling because there again, we're all advocating for these adults. We're advocating for services. We all want the same thing for them.
Okay. Well, Mr. Rich, we would like to thank you for this excellent presentation and the
Thank you.
phenomenal information that you have shared with us on elderly abuse. Thank
Well,
you
thank you.
all for joining us as well as participating with us on the Zoom tonight for our Legislation Day Advocate Workshop. Now, moving on just a little bit, we do have another workshop that will be coming up on Thursday, February the 18th. This workshop will be from 2 o'clock till 3:30. The workshop will feature Holding Out the Lifeline. And it is a mission to family presentation by Tony West, the opioid education prevention coordinator. Her presentation will include a PowerPoint. It will be about various drugs and classified as opioids in the physical and psychological effect of misuse and community resources. It's going to be a very good workshop, and we invite each and every one of you to Zoom in virtually for this workshop. And we will have another good evening and another good workshop. So if you don't have the link, we'll give you the link for this workshop, and if you have someone wants to sign up for it. But right now, we're gonna have our closing prayer, and in our closing prayer, that will a person be coming for our prayer warrior that will be coming before us tonight. She's our South Carolina United Methodist Women past president. Her name is Miss Marlene Spencer. Miss Marlene and her husband Larry resides in Clover, South Carolina. She is employed by Clover Districts as an educator, administrator, assistant to the superintendent, and clerk to the board of trustees. Miss Marlene is a lifelong United Methodist and a member of the St. James United Methodist Church in York, where she served as a church treasurer, the vice president of her local unit, and is very active in other areas of the church. Miss Marlene is a member of the Rock Hill District Connectional Ministry and is a lay delegate to the 2020-21 Southeastern Jurisdictional Conference. She is the immediate past conference president for the South Carolina United Methodist Women, having served from 2015 to 2018. One of her biggest joy is being Nana to 5 beautiful grandchildren. Now, I present to you our past president, Miss Marlene Spencer.
Thank you, Barbara, and thank you, Russell, for sharing that wonderful information. This has truly been a great hour of sharing. So, ladies and Russell, as we prepare ourselves for prayer this evening, let us offer up prayers to a God who promises to carry and save us, even to our old age. Let us not neglect to petition God on behalf of our elderly neighbors who may themselves be growing weary, for every new morning is filled with God's sufficient mercy. Let us pray. Almighty and everlasting Lord, You are the Father of all mercies and the God of all comfort. You are the God of endless love, ever caring, ever strong, always present, always just. You gave your only Son to save us by the blood of his cross. We pray this evening, God, for those who have been abused within our churches and the wider communities across our nation. Gentle Jesus, shepherd of peace, join to your own suffering the pain of all who have been hurt in body, mind, and spirit by those who betrayed the trust placed in them. Have compassion, Lord, upon all who have suffered the injustice, the humiliation, and the pain of abuse, sexual, physical, emotional, spiritual, and all other forms of sinful conduct. In the midst of their distressing circumstances, give them courage to speak. May your perfect love drive out fear and anxiety. In your mercy, God, create opportunities for these men, women, and children to share their pain, reveal their struggles, and expose the hurtful actions of others. We ask that you hear the cries of our brothers and sisters who have been gravely harmed and the cries of those who love them. Soothe their restless hearts, Lord, with hope. Steady their shaken spirits with faith. Give grace, Father God, sensitivity and wisdom to all who minister to the victims and survivors of abuse. Strengthen those who have been abused and their caregivers with the certainty of your love for them. Holy Spirit, comforter of hearts, heal your people's wounds and transform brokenness into wholeness. Grant us the courage, the wisdom, the humility and grace to act with justice. Breathe wisdom into our prayers and labors. Grant that all harmed by abuse may find peace and justice. And in all things, Lord, in all things, we ask that your name be glorified and that we, your people, do justice, love kindness, and walk humbly before you. We humbly plead these things in the name of our Lord and Savior Jesus the Christ. Amen.